Welcome to Inflection Point Podcast, where we cultivate change from the inside out as we ponder the Cairo question. Will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? We stand on the belief that dismantling racism goes beyond laws and legislation or politics and economics. Here, anti-racism activation is presented as an inside job where personal transformation and accountability impact social change. So take a seat at the anti-racism activation table with Inflection Point Podcast.
Well, hello there and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the newest episode of Inflection Point Podcast, where we are dedicated to the art of listening and authentic conversation. We challenge our audience to listen actively and intentionally for the purpose of self-awareness, understanding, personal transformation, and ultimately social impact. I'm your host, Anita Russell, and here's a quick hello from co-hosts Mavis and Gail.
Hello, I'm Mavis Bauman.
Hi, I'm Gail Hunter, and welcome.
Excellent. So again, we are continuing with this series entitled the Sankofa Leadership Continuum. So if you've been following us, you know we've been doing a lot of activity in that particular space. And just for your edification, the Sankofa Leadership Continuum is defined as a through line running from historical leaders of the past to contemporary leaders of the present to those who will emerge as future leaders. Melding together historical and contemporary reality, this through line inspires resistance, activism, art, literature, ethnography, and research to fuel transformation. So if you saw our last episode, we were doing a series of films, and we started off with Who We Are. We talked about that film last week, and actually it was connected to a community conversation that had happened in Sudbury, Massachusetts. Then we moved on to a second film called Hate, and that film was sort of like a deep dive into what hatred actually looks like and how racism and things of that nature can also be fueled by hatred. Now we're going to talk about a film called The Walk. And this particular film, it's a period film, it's a drama that's based on true events of desegregation and busing in Boston schools in 1974. So I'll just give you a quick synopsis of the film, and then we'll jump into our personal reactions, if you will, to the film. So the District Court of Massachusetts ordered Boston to integrate its public school system using busing. And the order was met with white community pushback, fury, and violence. The film actually centers on a police officer by the name of Bill Coughlin, an Irish cop who was confronting fierce social pressures when tasked to protect Black students as they are bused into an all-white South Boston high school. So the film also centers on these two high school teens who are about to begin their senior year under the integration law, the new integration law. One is a white teen by the name of Wendy Robinson. I'm sorry, it's the other way around. Wendy Robinson is an 18-year-old Black student who was selected for busing, and her father, Lamont. Both of them are caught up in the middle of violence and protesting by the white community. At the same time, a white teen by the name of Katy is the police officer's teenage daughter who is faced with her own racism. So I want to kind of give our reactions to this film. The three of us kind of watched it, not together, but kind of separately. And we each have like a different take on it. There were different aspects of the film that really touched us individually. And so we want to kind of share that with you. So I'm going to ask Gail, if you could start and just fill us in on what that film meant for you, and if there was anything specific in the film that really resonated with you, especially when you think about what's happening in the context of that film, and also what we're doing from an anti-racist perspective.
And there were probably three different parts of the film that touched me. The first one was at the market when the Irish police officer was near the market, I guess, or came by or whatever, and a black man had taken baby formula, and you didn't really know that at first. And so he stopped him, and then he realized what it was. He realized that the man didn't have money to buy it, and so he paid the store owner. And this was among all these white people. It was a store that was run by a white person, which I think was a fairly kind and brave thing to do, all right? Because that news was going to spread, and even the store owner was shocked that he did that. But it was at least an attempt to say I care, to say that every child deserves to be able to be fed and eat, and without their dad having to go to jail because he took. Not that it makes it right to steal, but
while he was trying to do something maybe somewhat altruistic,
right.
if you will. But at the same time, he was wrestling with it because he didn't necessarily want, for example, his partner to know that he had done that. And so there were certain things that he did. And there was Black people that were standing around and all of that. And there were certain things that he did that gave me the impression that he just didn't want people to know
Right.
that he was the kind of person who would do something like that. And I also look at it from the standpoint of the community that he was a part of South Boston and everything, and how the white people had certain expectations of how he would behave. Just because he was, I think in one point in the film, they were saying you were born and raised here, so you should be just us. And so
he was caught.
I'm sorry?
He was caught in the middle. He was caught between, right, his racial peers and his own internal racism, right? And not wanting anybody, not just wanting white people not to see, but he didn't want the Black people to realize either that he was doing that. And so
maybe it's something that jumped out at you.
Well, first of all, I guess the scene that Gail was just describing, I felt that the Irish cop was way over the top, that he could have calmed the situation down, but it was so harsh to see him really throw this man up against the wall. And then the store owner supported him. And I just thought it was inflammatory in a way. I guess I have a couple of overall comments that throughout the film, it's the white people that are the white community that's stirring up a lot of anger and hate around this busing. I don't know if that was intentional by the director, but this Irish cop and his old friend who's just gotten out of prison, and they're not so much friends anymore. There's just a lot of ugly behavior going on. And the Black characters in the film seemed so, I don't know, a lot more peaceful and courageous about the integration or the desegregation and the busing itself. So let's see. I guess the first thing that really kind of shocked me was when Katy, the white teenager, is so easily subjected to peer pressure that this this nasty boy that she's dating hands her a rock and says throw it, and she throws it right into the car of Wendy, the black teenager, and her father. And it just made me ache, because why would you hurt somebody just because somebody else told you to do that? I think that maybe it revealed that her racism out was deeper than I wanted to acknowledge, but she was pretty cruel. Does anybody want to comment on that part of it?
Yeah, I would say her racism was there. She was literally a product of the community that she lived in. And so it wasn't a surprise to me that she went along with it. I mean, you could look at it and say she was under peer pressure, but she gave into it. And you think about the language that she was using throughout the film, you could easily see that she was becoming a part of the very culture that her father was kind of trying to counteract, if you will. So he's got this person living in his home, living under his roof, who is kind of going in this one particular direction. Because even when Katy and her mom were having that conversation, when she got the letter saying that Katy was staying at the white school, and how happy they were, and all of that, and then the conversation started to slide into a different space where Katy used the N-word, and her mother immediately corrected her. Mm-hmm. And basically told prepared for that, because it's almost like she was looking at it as if things would still basically be the same, because she was going to that school and not really understanding the larger conflict in her community, in the white community, that was going on. And I would push back just a little bit on something that you said, mm-hmm. where when it got to the scene with the violence and all of that, whether that was there for the sake of the film, because
in the rock throwing,
not the rock throwing, but when they were at the scene where things got really, really violent. And at the school, when they came on the bus. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but they got on the school, because that scene reminded me of exactly the same thing when you look at old film footage of the Little Rock Nine, or when you look at the film footage of white spaces and everything. It was the white community that was causing all of the damage and the name calling and the and all of that, and bringing all of that white supremacy, racist energy into that space. It was not the Black kids. And the same thing in this particular film. To me, I thought it was an interesting contrast when it would show what was happening in the conversations that the Black family was having versus some of the conversations that the white family was having. Because in the one household where the guy was sitting down and he was kind of just cussing everybody out, in that scene right there, it was just, between that scene and Katy, the daughter's mindset, the other police officers, some of them, and all of that angst was coming directly from the white community.
Yeah. Well, and the 18-year-old Wendy, I think was her name, when asked the question, how was your first day, at school? Because she was the one both to be at school. And her comment was, it was fine. And that I sat with some kids at lunch and made friends with them, and it's okay. It's great.
Yeah, and so that's
contrast too, right?
Yeah,
exactly. That happened the first day of school for Katy.
Exactly.
Boys' school when Wendy had to go, and not Wendy, but the other
the other friend. I can't remember her name. I don't remember her name either. But again, that was that contrast because the two best friends, one of them ended up staying at the South Boston High School,
right.
and the other one ended up having to get bused over to the, was it Roxbury? The
Roxbury.
school district.
Yeah.
And so here's these two friends that they're seniors, and they're both hoping that they both would be in the same school. So that was a contrast in and of itself. And then the other contrast came, like you mentioned, Gail, at the end of the day, when people were kind of reviewing how was your day and everything like that. On the one hand, on the Katy side, it turned violent.
Very violent.
It turned completely violent.
Right.
Right? And in the process of it becoming violent, who got hurt? Her father.
Yeah, her
Right.
father.
Her father.
Right. Her
Got
father.
hurt. Actually, her father.
Protecting. It was her father got hurt that was protecting the gunshot from the friend of ex-friend.
Exactly.
That, right. And so by protecting that young girl.
And he was protecting the Black girl.
Right.
And so, and I thought it was also interesting that it was Wendy's dad, the EMT, that took care of her father.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And so it's just really interesting when you
great story.
Yeah, it was a good story.
Exactly. When you kind of look at these contrasting things and just realize what the source of the violence was.
Well, you could, right, you could see the pure racism in the white community, right? And you could see the I forget his name, the police officer that was white, the father of Katy, his own internal conflict, right? And how he was, he wasn't sure that he was even not racist, right? And that there was one scene where he questioned that, and which I thought took a great deal, some courage for him to do that, right? And to say, maybe I am racist. I haven't stood up. I haven't done that. And so you can see the various stages of somebody moving towards anti-racism, right? From completely where I'm not there at all to somebody that can be completely there, which was that student, which was Katie's best friend that went to the other high school. And she was fine, right? Yeah. She was good.
And there was no indication that there was any violence at the Black school.
Right.
No violence,
I was just thinking about that. I wanted to point out one other thing. Wendy, the Black student, was my hero. She just was such a lovely character. And when she was talking with her dad about going to Southie, the school in South Boston, she said, I have to be brave. If we don't go to that white school, they will never get to know us.
That's right.
And I just thought that was really perceptive for such a young person, very courageous. And in fact, she's the only one that actually stepped off that bus at the white school and went into that, melee with everybody screaming.
And the young black friend of hers that was on the bus, he was acting like he was going to be violent with everybody while inside the bus, but he didn't follow her.
No, he didn't.
He didn't.
Oh, he did not.
He didn't. And also the sort of invisible character in her family was her mother.
Right, that's right.
Because I got the impression that her mother was a really, really strong woman. And if you remember, we're sitting at the table, Wendy and her dad, when they were having that conversation, when she got the letter, and he reminded her of these certain things, defining what hatred is, and how do we fight hatred. So these are things that, to me, they had been teaching her all along, because she didn't hesitate to recite what that thing was, that mantra, if you will, that they had around racism. She didn't hesitate. And so for me, that just speaks to this idea. Teach our kids in order for them to be able to survive and not lose their minds and not lose their sense of self. She had a very strong sense of herself and who she was. And so for me, the invisible character in all of that was her mom.
Well, and it was interesting with her character that she was very strong, and she did follow her mother's path, right? And she stood up and she was going off the bus, but she also was human. She was afraid. Drove by and Katy and her friends throwing rocks at the car. She was really genuinely afraid, as she should have been.
She was
right?
terrified.
Right. And it was the dad that wanted to go back and do whatever, and she got him to stop. Because she knew that was not the right path. That was not the right way.
And the other thing that I really loved about her is that she had a sense of the future.
Yes.
She had a sense of what she was going to be doing or where she wanted to go beyond high school. Right. And I think that was something that was a slight variation when you look at kind of the kids from Southie. They were more focused on just graduating and, oh, it's our senior year and all of that. And I mean, she was happy and everything is graduating senior year, but she had an outlook that went on just being a senior in high school. And I thought that was something really, really cool about her character as well.
Yeah. When Wendy said, I have to be brave, her dad said, we have to make the choice to stay in control when white people are out of control.
Mm-hmm.
Ouch. That's got to be the most difficult thing.
And white supremacy is out of control.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really did like the way Billy, the Irish cop, was doing his self
evaluation. Yeah.
Yes. And how he said, he was asking himself, am I a racist? And he says, I deal with racist people all the time and I don't say anything.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
What does that make?
That was his critical self-reflection.
That's right.
The whole idea behind the work that I do is this idea that you have to understand your thoughts, your beliefs, and your ideas. And how do they show up in your words, your actions, and your behaviors? And so he was going through a process of critical self-reflection within himself to kind of get a sense, especially, I think, as he was beginning to understand where his daughter was with the ideology, if you will, that she was beginning to adopt. Because I know the mom saw it, and that was troubling for the both of them. My sense was that it was very troubling for both of the parents. And so it's this idea of, well, where is she getting this from?
Right.
But it's also the full acknowledgement that it's coming from outside influence. The whole fact that she lied to her mom when they thought that she was out because she was dating Marty, the nice boy,
white guy,
and meanwhile she's dating the son of her father's enemy, essentially. Right. And so it just created a very interesting dynamic in that family, where the parents, not perfect, but just had a slightly different background. Because there was that one scene when the mother said, well, we're Catholics and we love ourselves. We love.
And don't use that language. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
She didn't learn that language at home. She learned it outside by peers and culture.
Exactly.
What's going on. The racism.
Exactly. So yeah, it's very like I said, the thing that I like is the series of contrasts, right? And I think if you look at this film from through a lens of like entertainment, you'll miss all of those subtle,
absolutely,
those subtle contrasts that are there.
Yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to Marty, the nice boyfriend. Kate is very, again, self-focused and concerned about her senior year being a bummer. And she said, there's never going to be a senior year. The Blacks took that from us. And Marty says, we took that from ourselves.
Right.
Yeah, she was pretty heavy duty. I guess I just kept thinking that she was going to come around, that some tough place in her was going to emerge. But she was pretty racist.
Right. But she did have a
Did at the end,
counterpoint.
yeah.
The scene at the hospital
Right.
when
Oh, no.
Wendy realized that she was the one that threw the first,
Rock, yeah.
the first stone.
Yeah.
She was the one who cast the first stone, and Wendy realized that that's who she was. And that's when she called her out.
Right.
That scene when they were in the hospital, because the
Well-
bottom line is my dad saved your life, your father's life. My dad was there.
Katy herself started blaming Wendy that my dad's in this hospital room fighting for his life because of you. And
Right.
and then
Right.
Wendy came around, and that's when she straightened her out and said, no, that is not what happened or how it happened.
Exactly.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
says, am I supposed to be happy that my dad will die a hero because of you?
Right.
The
Right.
black woman. It just, I don't know.
She
Yeah,
clarified
and
that.
meanwhile, Katy is feeding the flames of hatred. She's
right.
feeding the flames of
Well, and
racism,
the distorted belief system
feeding
that's
the
underneath
flames
it.
of violence, right?
Right.
She's participating in that.
Participating, and she wasn't willing to look inside either.
She
Right.
was not willing to look inside herself. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's a good
So
film.
once Wendy showed that picture to her, that was interesting. She listened. She heard.
You mean when Wendy recognized Katy?
When Wendy told Katy, this is what happened. This is why your father's where he is. This is how this happened. It was not because of me coming to your school, right? When she
Right.
did that, yeah.
Right.
Katy listened. She didn't. She stopped fighting back.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, she was deep, I'll tell you.
Mhm.
I just would highly recommend this film of stars in it that I have never heard of, never seen any one of them before. But I thought it was well directed and very substantive. And
well, the one young lady, Wendy, she's been in a lot of films as well. I'm trying to think. Yeah, she's been in a number of films.
Recent films in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this film was just done in 2022, so it's not even that old.
No, it's a newer film. Yes.
Yeah.
It was the 70s, no. After we come back from break, Anita, I want to ask how those scenes made you feel and how they reminded you.
I mean, your experience.
Yeah, when your school was integrated. And, how you might have identified with Wendy, the Black girl on the bus. I kept thinking when I began to watch the film that I would be brave enough to do that. It wouldn't be that much of a challenge. But her terror just went right through my body when I was watching it. And I thought, I don't know if I could have done it. Not with violence around me.
One of the things that you, dare I say, use the word master as a Black person is being able to stand up even when you are afraid.
Right.
There's just something about the fight and the resistance that you just push the fear to the side and you just do what needs to be done. Right. So this is actually a good time for us to take a break, and then we'll come back and continue the conversation, and I'll answer what you said. And then I want to kind of look at this whole issue of school desegregation based on a particular article that I had read recently. So we'll take a break and then we'll come back and resume the conversation. So welcome back to Inflection Point Podcast and our discussion of films that spark community conversation. We have been discussing the 2022 film, The Walk, directed by Daniel Adams. So I want to change the conversation a little bit, and maybe I'd like you to kind of state that question that you asked me when we were on the break.
Okay. I know that you went through the process of integration when you were in high school. So when I was watching this film, The Walk, young Black woman on a bus, so terrified, and the white people around the bus trying to tip the bus over out of rage. Of course, I just thought of you, and I just wondered, I would love to hear more about how that energy felt to you when it basically happened to you.
Mm-hmm. So I didn't necessarily experience direct violence the way that happened. So I'll tell you about in the summer, and our audience, if you've been paying attention and listening to us, you may have heard me talk about this before, but I graduated from Still Valley, and Still Valley came into existence, if you will, in 1971, and it was a result of an attempt to desegregate the schools, right? And so I ended up being one of those people like Wendy, who ended up having to go from my own community or neighborhood school and into a school that was in the white community. So I grew up in Homestead, and the integration was bringing together Homestead, Munhall, and West Homestead. And of the three, Munhall was the one that was more of a staunch racist community. And so now I found myself being walked. We didn't get bused. We walked into Munhall in order to be able to go to school over there. Prior to that, I would go from the school was set up. You would go to Homestead Elementary School, and then Homestead Junior High, and then Homestead Senior High. But they added this like intermediate thing in there, which was 9th and 10th grade. And so I ended up having to go over to the intermediate school in Munhall, and we fought regularly, students fighting. So, but there were a number of things that I noticed that were sort of operating outside of the fighting and all of that. One of the things that really stood out for me was that was the first time in my life that I had ever been in a classroom where I was the only Black student in the classroom. Part of that was because I was a science major. So I was on the science track. So I was taking like the physics and, biology and all that sort of thing. But I found myself in my physics class, and I was the only Black person in the class. And the very, very first thing that I noticed is that my teacher ignored me. And whenever I raised my hand to answer a question or what have you, he would just simply overlook me and call on other people. So that was something that was completely new to me. Never had that experience before. But then there was one particular day where we were standing outside. The school had been evacuated. Everybody had to leave the school. We had to go across the street. At the time, it was a big open field, right? And so they moved the entire school body over to this open field because people were phoning in bomb threats and things like that to the school. And so I just remember a moment when I was standing there in this field, and it's now beginning to really, really sink in what's happening here. And again, if you've heard me talk about my mother, who was an activist, but for some reason, I think because her protests and things were always like away from me. Like I never went to a protest with her or anything like that, but I know she would be protesting for welfare rights. She was protesting against like some hospitals and things like that who refused to accept patients who had a Medicaid card, like they were on welfare. And so there was, this whole welfare rights kind of activity, but that didn't apply to me directly. But when I was standing in that field, that's when I realized that my mother's work had a direct connection to me, because here I am standing outside of my new school, and these people clearly don't want me to be there. But the fact that a bomb threat was called in, because bomb threat equals violence to me. And so now I'm being put in a situation where there are people who would potentially commit violence against me as a Black teen, literally 14 years old. as a Black teen, me personally, Anita Russell, because I am now in a space that was supposed to be preserved for whites only. So that was a very powerful and very eye-opening moment for me. Not that I wasn't aware in a larger context, but this context got really, really narrow because it was me standing out in the field and all of that. So that had a huge it had a huge impact on me.
And
One of the before you say that, one of the things that I want to point out is 20 years later, the school is Steel Valley is still segregated. That's the irony of the whole entire thing. The school district is still segregated. Homestead still is mostly Black students. Munhall is still mostly white students. And when they built the new high school, guess where they put it? Right in the middle of Munhall.
White area.
So, yeah. Well, Munhall is the area that I mentioned was the racist.
Right, that was
the three communities. Munhall was the racist community.
Predominantly white,
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, that just really hit home for me as I was standing out there, like, wow, just coming into that realization, this bomb threat is happening because I'm here. Me multiplied times all the other Black students.
Right.
That's why the bomb threat is happening, because we're here.
And you have stated before how you could feel the hatred. And I just, I can't imagine what that was like and how frightening, how that would, affect you on so many levels, your psyche, your
I have to admit, it wasn't really frightening. I think it was because I don't even know how to explain it. I think it was because of the work that I saw my mother do. So I saw my mother go out and gear up because there's a possibility that she was going to be hit by police officers with billy clubs and things like that. So it wasn't necessarily that I was operating under fear. It was more huge consciousness. Like I just became so consciously aware of what was going on and what was happening, because now it was happening directly to me.
Maybe you expected some of that resistance. You think, could that have been part of it? That you were sort of—
Say again?
Were you kind of prepared in a way psychologically that it might not run smoothly? No?
I didn't really know what to expect. You mean in terms of before we got there, what to expect? I didn't know what to expect. And I'm just 14. I'm just 14.
You're being a good girl.
I was like, oh, okay. I gotta go to another school. Well, okay. We'll see how this works.
Right.
And all that. So it was, as a matter of fact, when we had our 40th high school reunion, I think like in 2015, maybe. And what was interesting, it was that a lot of those white students that were there, and the conversation actually came up about the racism.
Oh.
And the way this one particular gentleman had put it, if it wasn't for all that racism, we would have had different experiences. Well, of course, if it wasn't for all that racism, we would all have different experiences. Of course.
The world.
The world would have different experiences.
Right?
Exactly. So it was just an interesting situation altogether. Yeah. So I had this article, and I wanted to go through a couple of points to have the two of you comment on what you think of this. So this article is this is sort of like our open discussion of what I call the lingering saga of educational segregation, right? And it's based on an article entitled "Why America Needs a New Approach to School Segregation." And it was written by Jerry Rosiak, published on May 17, 2018 on theconversation.com. That's a media type of a website. So here's these 3 points that I want us to kind of dissect out in a little bit of time that we have left. Despite all the time and effort invested desegregating the nation's schools over the past half century, the reality is America's schools are more segregated now than they were in 1968. So this he's referencing 1968 in 2018 and describing the schools as being more segregated now than they were then, right? So what's your take on that? What's your off the cuff response to that?
I think most people, certainly white people, would be very surprised to know that.
Mm-hmm.
In conversations I've had with my friends, they kind of feel like racism's over, right? You can't do racist things anymore. It's against the law. Yeah, I think a lot of them would be surprised.
And it's actually laughable to me when I hear white people say, "Oh, that's against the law." You all control the laws.
Right, that's right.
Remember Jim Crow laws?
Right, exactly. It was white people that
Right?
set up all these laws anyways.
Right, exactly.
And we don't observe
based on white supremacy. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So Gail, what's your take on that statement?
Well, I don't have my picture. Yeah, I'm surprised that, well, I shouldn't be surprised people were surprised that was going on. But of course it is. I mean, what have they done for that since that time period in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, right?
Right.
It's based on the definition of where you live geographically. And so it's similar to the redlining that happened in the 30s and 40s, right? And so it's going to be based on the communities and how they have been sectioned off, right? And primarily Black or primarily white. Yeah.
Right. And the funding is primarily white,
right.
And little.
It's still not equitable. Exactly.
Yeah, it's still not equitable.
Go to any state and look at their educational budget and see what areas that money's going to.
Right. Exactly. Right?
And then they tried in Pennsylvania, they're trying to base it on scores on those the PSAT or whatever the test they were taking at the end of the year. Well,
right. So
so you get more money if you get higher scores with your students.
Exactly. And all that does is,
right?
It just continues to perpetrate
segregation.
Exactly
the same thing.
Right?
Yeah, it's the same thing.
So there's something just terribly ironic about all of this. And again, what I said earlier in looking at Still Valley, this is what was tried in 1971. And when you look at where we are in 2023, it's the same exact situation all over again, because here's the flaw in segregation laws or desegregation laws or integration laws, whatever you want to call them. Here's the flaw. You cannot legislate kindness. You cannot legislate love.
And respect.
You cannot legislate respect. You can't legislate that. So while you're throwing all of these laws out there, and this film, The Walk, is a perfect example, the laws were made, but you didn't examine the hearts of the people who now have to be subjected to those laws. Because if your law doesn't change a man's heart,
that's right.
It just doesn't, right? And if you're not dealing with, again, thoughts, beliefs, and ideas that reside within individual human beings, if you're not touching that space, all the desegregation laws in the world is not going to make a difference. So here's the second point that was made. This new segregation is not directly enforced by law, but indirectly through school zoning, housing patterns, and recently by neighborhood secessionist movements. Now, secessionist movements, rather, you kind of go back to the Civil War, the states that seceded from the Union. It's still kind of that same mindset.
Echoes that, yes.
Right, exactly. Permitting affluent white families to continue to monopolize premium educational resources. Again, that statement right there, it's not about the laws. It's all of these other things. Like Gail, you mentioned redlining. It's all about that. But it's all about the idea that if you're not transforming the hearts and minds of individual people, all the laws in the world is not going to make a difference, because people just work around the laws.
We can't change anyone's behavior or thoughts or feelings without changing their beliefs that fuel that. Change will not happen by attaching to the same belief system. And so
Right,
nothing has been
exactly.
done to really directly approach that
Yeah.
mass way, right? And
Yeah.
that's what needs to happen.
Exactly.
That's what I think we're doing.
Anita, are we going to talk about the aspect of Black schools, Black people wanting to be free to do their own thing, to achieve the education levels that they want for their kids? I mean, if I were a Black parent, I would much rather find ways, to get the educational resourcing than to bus my kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
How does that fit into this? Because it seems kind of indicated.
Right. So you have to look at today versus then, right? So in today's climate, yes, parents are definitely doing something. I mean, I look at the way my kids were educated, very not traditional. I mean, I had a homeschool program for 4 years, right?
Yeah.
So my kids went to elementary school once they got to a certain point, and part of that was because of where I lived. I lived in Trenton, and at the time, the Trenton public school was not ideal. It wasn't what I wanted for my kids. So I was always looking for a different path in order for them to, get the education that they needed. And I'm going to read this last point because I want to talk about how this last point ties into what you just said. School segregation communicates corrosive messages to students of color, concluding that they are targeted as bad kids, garbage people, or violent, and therefore not worthy of investment. That's the mindset that people have under these circumstances, that we're not worthy of investment. If you go back and listen to some of the language in the film, right? Some of the words, the ways that the Black kids were being described. Right? They're bad, they're thugs, they're this, they're that. Go back and remember when we talked about in that earlier episode when we were talking about adultification bias. All of this getting piled on top of our children, just getting piled on top of our children. And so alternatives, heck yeah. My daughter, Olivia, HBCU. Like it wasn't even a thing for her in terms of selecting something different.
No question. Yeah.
Right? That was what, and it wasn't even, I can't even honestly own that and say that it was my decision. It was her decision that she wanted to go to an HBCU. Right. And so the more Black folks continue in this vein, having our own just doesn't seem like that bad of an idea.
Right.
Right.
But the problem is that investment part, because we can't necessarily really have our own and build our own while at the same time being dependent upon the government to give us money. That's where we start building from the inside out, building our own infrastructures or building up the HBCUs and looking at those alternative ways of education. Like the school that Cairo goes to is owned and operated by Black folks. That's a conscious choice. And it's not a conscious choice because we don't want him to be in an environment with white kids. It's a conscious choice because if he's not in that type of environment that's going to support him and give him what he needs and see him as a valuable investment, that's what it's more connected to.
At his young age, at 3,
his young age,
we want him to know who he is. Yeah.
But it's the government that needs to start doing that very same thing, to begin to look at all children as a place to invest money into their education.
Exactly.
No matter what color, no matter how wealthy or not wealthy they are. I mean, that's really where the major belief system has to be changed. And it's not.
But I think our history is so embroiled in racism that it's so hard for particularly white people, lawmakers, legislators, all of that to break the mold. We're in a break the mold.
We have to break that
time
mold.
and space right now.
Yes.
Break the mold and let's just redesign all over
Truth
with
is all.
equity, with
That's right.
equity in mind.
Well, because truth is all we really have. And when we veer from that truth, which is what's happened in this country, we don't have what it says that we're supposed to have. Everybody doesn't have that. And the truth is that we all, this is a country that needs to be able to address the equity and address the educational systems and give people and the school systems what they really actually need and deserve to have.
Exactly.
Equitably.
Instead, we focus on problems on the back end.
Right.
Right. Until you begin to fully accept and recognize that white supremacy and the idea of racism in this country, institutionalized racism and systemic racism, is very real.
Very much real.
It's very real. And so if you're not addressing things from that standpoint, you're just band-aiding. Exactly. You know, they've been band-aiding schools for years, just band-aiding, and the schools just keep hemorrhaging and bleeding out the same stuff.
Yeah. I think of Black Wall Street when I look at what's happening, you know, with education. Black Wall Street was built from within and was successful.
Very successful.
Very successful. And neighbors worked together. They had a community. And I just don't know why we can't allow that to happen in education.
Yeah, I mean,
I could.
I just got the message that we have about 3 minutes left. So
okay,
I want to, the last thing I want to say is really this idea, and this actually comes from the Center for Creative Leadership. They have a program called Better Conversations Every Day. And their first tenet is listen to understand. Know the facts while striving to understand the feelings and the values behind the personal narratives and experiences, such as this film or such as my own experience. And all of that requires critical self-reflection, intentional listening for the purpose of understanding, not listening for the purpose of rebuttal, and the willingness to take personal accountability. So I'm going to leave you with a quote. Creating a vision and setting strategy is to act in the role of social architect and nourish a context in which people are given the respect and permission to 1, feel included, 2, learn, 3, contribute, and 4, innovate. And this quote comes from Timothy R. Clark, social scientist and organizational consultant. And it's from a book called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, Defining the Path to Inclusion and Innovation. And as usual, I relate this back to the Cairo question. Will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? And as always, the final question is, have the right to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which they were born. So I want to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you the next time at Inflection Point Podcast here on Transformation Talk Radio. We are here every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here. Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can cultivate change from the inside out.